Welcome, ER, and other viewers later. This evening, we're going to speak a little bit about voice. I'm going to talk about voice, and we will do some practice as well, I hope. So first of all, the concept of voice. So let's talk a little bit about what that means in terms of writing. And I see one other person just joined. Welcome. Concept of voice is sort of in many ways an advanced concept for creative writing because it's a little bit on the abstract side. It's a little bit up here. So let's talk a bit about what it means. So first of all, I would say that although voice sounds like something spoken, you know, we all have our individual physical voice. When we're talking about creative writing, it also has some other elements to it. Let's start with the obvious. So it does actually have something to do with our spoken physical voice, because when you're writing creatively, you're trying to capture a kind of way of speaking or talking. Although obviously it's on the written page, it's in words. But it does start with that concept of something that is coming out of you, out of your mouth or out of your pen. But there's more to it than that. I think a lot of times we think of voice as our fingerprint. Type that up into chat and see if we can talk about that for just a moment. So let's use this metaphor of a fingerprint. So first of all, we all have our fingerprints, right? You know, and if you've ever had your fingerprint taken, you know that you have all these various swirls in your finger, and everyone's fingerprints are, of course, completely unique, right? That's what makes fingerprints interesting, and also why if you get in trouble, right, you go to the police station and you have to make your fingerprints, because that fingerprint identifies who you are. So let's talk about how that might apply to writing for the couple of people who are here, Jordan and ER. Can you hear me? And if so, let's talk about fingerprint and writing. So how can your writing also be a sort of a fingerprint? Jordan?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. How can writing be sort of a fingerprint?
Well, man, I'm
A little bit louder. I'm having trouble hearing you, please. That's better.
I probably need to rehear it. You know.
Okay, so when we're talking about a fingerprint, if you apply that idea to writing of a fingerprint, how can your writing also have the quality of a fingerprint?
Well, your fingerprint in the end and the lead of the writing both imprints on the paper.
Okay, yes, there's that idea that it's on paper, right? Absolutely. And when you make your fingerprint, you're making it on paper. Very good. Okay, excellent. I would add to that it's unique to you.
Yes.
It's unique to you, right? So how can your writing be also unique? Oh, ER is chiming in. Writing is a fingerprint in that it allows the inner voice to come out and be formed, manipulated, revised, and sometimes to just plain identify a reader/writer inside he or she is creating the story. Very good, ER. Absolutely, yes. So what you're doing when you're developing your voice, what's called the writer's voice, is that you're developing some of these things that ER mentioned. You're creating a sense of identity. You're creating a sense of, let me add a couple other words here in the chat, style or personality. We don't really think of writing as having a personality or having a style, but it does. And you have to sort of investigate that or analyze the writing closely to understand it. So a fingerprint is a kind of style or a kind of personality that is unique to every writer. That's what makes writing so interesting, right? So many of the great writers are also the great writers of voice, and they have a certain approach or style that is very different than other writers. So they find their voice is the saying. And we'll talk about how to do this in just a minute. Okay, so but there's on the sentence level, there's actually something to this. So not only is you're writing a fingerprint, but also in doing that, in developing your fingerprint and developing your personality as a writer, a lot of times you're developing certain kinds of sentences or certain kinds of ways to write. In other words, your writing has a kind of identifiable quality. You can sense what it is, and you can say, oh, well, that's an ER story, or that's a Jordan story, because it has a particular feel or a particular kind of sense that is very unique to that particular writer. Right. And ER and Jordan, feel free to just continue to type up any thoughts that you might have in chat. If you don't want to use your mic, that's completely fine. Okay, so just to reiterate real quick, language is a big part of fiction writing and how you think about the language. Now, this, like I said, this is an advanced concept because when I talked to this group a couple of months ago, we focused on characterization, and that is a much more kind of simplistic and very streamlined idea because everyone knows what characters are, and you can develop characters over the course of your writing in any way that you like, and your characters are, hopefully very lively and interesting. But it's a very easy concept to understand. Voice is a lot more abstract. So let's go back to this idea of finding your voice. This is sort of the cliche that sometimes teachers talk about in terms of the whole concept of voice. I actually think it's the wrong way to phrase it. I don't think that we really, as writers, whether you're 7 years old or 70 years old, I don't think we really find our voice. I think it takes a different verb. We really develop our voice. Let's just change the phrasing. So if you're developing your voice, what you're doing is you're really working on that and trying to create your own style. And I think that's a better way to put it than finding your voice, as if, it's just kind of there under the couch or something, and you just have to grab it and dig it up. But actually, I think you develop as a writer your voice over time and lots of experience and lots of practice at writing. So that's a very important thing to identify because, and it's actually empowering, I hope, to writers, because you get the sense that this is something you can work on and improve upon. And, you can't just reach over here and find it all of a sudden and voila, you have it all of a sudden and you're a great writer. I don't think it works like that. I think you have to sort of practice and practice and practice as a writer to get better. Okay, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say on what voice is. Now, let's just say a quick word about why it's important. Why is voice important? Pretty obvious, right? Voices are important. Jordan, did you want to say something?
Oh, never mind. Well, I was gonna say it's important because I want to know what the character sound like, what type of he sound like. Like, is he like an old man, a young person, like for voices?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So in other words, it's important to identify your voice because it helps identify who you are as a writer, right? So establishing your personality is very important because otherwise you're just a writer without really any sense of who you are, and other people don't really understand who you are either. So it's it's kind of like your identity in many ways. That's why voice is so interesting. So it's very important as writers over the course of your writing to figure out what is your voice and to find a way to express that voice and to develop your voice. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples. Okay, and some of these examples will be brief, and others will be a little bit longer. I'm going to call on a few different books. Actually, hold that thought for just 1 minute. Let me read you a sort of a quote of inspiration from Eudora Welty. This is a really great book. As you can tell, it's very beat up, my copy. Eudora Welty's One Writer's Beginnings. Okay, I would definitely recommend this to everyone. It's a great book that is very easy to read. It's about 100 pages long. One Writer's Beginnings. And Eudora Welty has a whole section in this book about voice and developing your voice. And here's a little paragraph. And she writes that the outside world is the vital component of my inner life. My work, in the terms in which I see it, is as dearly matched to the world as its secret sharer. My imagination takes its strength and guides its direction from what I see and hear and learn and feel and remember of my living world. But I was to learn slowly that both these worlds, outer and inner, were different from what they seemed to me in the beginning. So the last part of this paragraph is very powerful because she's highlighting the fact that even though she has this outer world that she is a part of, that we're all part of, at the end, she's discussing how they're different from what they seemed to me in the beginning. In other words, she grew as a writer. She developed her voice. In this whole chapter, she talks about different aspects of this whole voice concept and how it really took her a long time to develop over time. Looking back, and it even took, experiences and memories as well. So again, One Writer's Beginnings by Eudora Welty. Highly recommend that. Okay, let's take a look at some other examples of voice now. And for this, I'm going to kind of call another kind of beginning writer book to the table here, which is called The Art and Craft of Fiction. And it's subtitled A Writer's Guide by Michael Cardos. Okay, really great book on creative writing. And it has a little section, really just a couple of pages on voice. And it highlights some additional aspects of voice. For example, diction, syntax, tone, and language in general as being key to voice. We're not going to get into all those nitty-gritty aspects at this point. But he also includes some examples, and I'm just going to read 2 examples from this text. Okay, the first one is from a very famous writer who you've probably all read and heard of, Edgar Allan Poe. This is from The Black Cat, 1843 is the date. And this little paragraph reads, the cat followed me down the steep stairs and nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness, uplifting an axe and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed in my hand. I aimed a blow at the animal, which of course would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. All right, that's a very violent ending. As you know, Edgar Allan Poe has a lot of, he's kind of like an early horror writer to some extent. But what I'm interested in is kind of understanding how his voice works. So I'll ask a question, and if you don't know, I'll just answer it myself. The question is, how would you describe Edgar Allan Poe's voice here in The Black Cat? he has a lot of interesting words in here, right? Words like exasperated me to madness, uplifting an axe, descended, goaded, interference, demonical. I would say that his language here, his voice, his creative writing voice is very, actually kind of formal, maybe a good description. It's a little bit more formal than what we would expect today because 1843, right? It has an older, sort of an older feel to it. This is also why people like Edgar Allan Poe, though, because the language is very formal, but what's happening underneath is a horror show, right? It's this horrible situation. At the end, you know, he's killing this speaker is killing his wife. Okay, so that's one example. It's sort of a famous one from Edgar Allan Poe. The next one is just a couple of sentences, and this is a good comparison and contrast, I hope. All right, so the example is from Raymond Carver's Cathedral, and this is a short story from 1983. And here we have a little paragraph, and it reads, "This blind man, an old friend of my wife's, he was on the way to spend the night. His wife had died, so he was visiting the dead wife's relatives in Connecticut. He called my wife from his in-laws. Arrangements were made." And that's it. Okay, so how can we explain the voice of this particular writer, this sort of fingerprint or the personality of this writer as compared to Edgar Allan Poe? Are there any complicated words? Any words like hitherto or exasperated? No, it's all very simple words, right? The most complicated word there is probably arrangements. The words are mostly one syllable. Sentences are very simple, like his wife had died. So I would say this is a much more sort of simplistic approach to writing. That sounds like a negative. It's not. It's just a much more kind of, we can all understand what's happening. And that was his approach, Raymond Carver's fingerprint. He was very sort of streamlined and simplistic in his writing. Okay, a couple more examples, and then we're going to practice. Okay. Now, you can also talk about voice regarding all kinds of other genres of writing. It's not exclusive to fiction. It could be poetry. It can be if you're interested in writing plays, or even nonfiction. If you're interested in writing about yourself, you can work on developing your voice. Here's an example. When I talked about characterization a couple of months ago, we looked at an example from the first part of this book. It's a two-part series called Persepolis. This is Persepolis, the story of a return by Marjane Satrapi. It's a famous book because it was made into a film about 15 years ago. And this is just the very beginning of the book. And I should say it's a graphic novel. So it looks like a cartoon. So I'll hold this up sort of at the end. I'll just read this one page, but I'll hold it up so you can see the visuals. And the visuals kind of help you understand the voice as well, or the fingerprint. So this chapter is called The Soup. It's the very beginning of this book. And I'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 panels, right? 6 sort of like cartoons here. The first panel reads, November 1984. I'm in Austria. I had come here with the idea of leading a religious Iran or an open and secular Europe, and that Zozo, my mother's best friend, would love me like her own daughter. Here's the panel. Has this really great swirly pattern here on the bed, right, with this sort of blanket. Only here I am. She left me at a boarding house run by nuns. This one. My room was small, and for the first time in my life, I had to share my space with another person. That's this one here. I hadn't met her yet. I only knew that her name was Lucia. I wondered what she would look like. That's these two panels. And then lastly, Europe, the Alps, Switzerland, Austria. From this, I deduced that she would be like Heidi. This was okay with me. I really liked Heidi. Okay, so how can we describe the language and also the visual part of this particular book? What is the voice like in this book? Any answers to that, Jordan?
Well, it sounds kind of young, like, a young person, like a young woman, and a curiosity. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. So unlike the other two examples, those were adults, right? Here we have, you can tell from the picture that this is a story of a young person. And the language is actually very simple. For example, only here I am. She was left at a boarding house run by nuns. It's very direct. The readership, the audience is maybe, anybody really. Someone in elementary school, I think, could understand this book, or even junior high. I think it would be an easy read for anyone who can read. It's very straightforward. And what I like about this book also is all the really great visuals. The visuals are very black and white. There's no color here, right? And they're also very stark, very ornate, and stark at the same time. I mean, we have all this black on the characters' clothing, and then just the swirly black and white here with the bed. And it's just a nice sort of very stark contrast. And the film itself is very similar. So it presents kind of like this very stark feel, very very ominous almost. Stick that up in the chat there. Okay, so that's Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. Okay, and one more example. This is also one that I used in my characterization, just because I think it's a really good one for everyone to look at. And this is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Hayden. Okay, and this one is similar. So we looked at some differences in the first two, but this is actually kind of similar to some extent to Persepolis. And I'll just read a little paragraph. Actually, this book is interesting too because it also uses visuals. And what's kind of interesting about this book is that the narrator, Christopher, is autistic. He's on the spectrum. And so, for example, you kind of see this on page 11, and I'll show you the visual here. It's not like an ordinary book. It has like these graphs, or in other places it has pictures or diagrams or maps. So it's a really wonderful book. So it's just this little section. It's organized by prime number. Christopher is really into math. And it reads, chapters in books are usually given the cardinal numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. But I've decided to give my chapters prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, and so on, because I like prime numbers. This is how you work out what prime numbers are. First, you write down all the positive whole numbers in the world. Then you take away all the numbers that are multiples of 2. Then you take away all the numbers that are multiples of 3, and so forth. And that's why we have this little chart here. Okay. So how would you describe the style of this one, ER or Jordan? the voice. What's the voice like? Childlike, right? Just like the previous one. Different feel though, because this character is completely different and in some ways much more complex. There's a lot going on with Christopher in this book. Okay, are you guys ready to do a little writing?
Yes.
Okay, good. So do you all have access to a computer program or even just a piece of paper with a pen?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so we're going to try two examples, and maybe you can share a little bit of what you wrote as well. So we'll do two exercises. All right, the first exercise will be very direct and connected to what we just talked about, which is the whole concept of a voice. Okay, so here's the prompt, or here's the directions. I'll give you about 10 minutes on this at most. Okay, I'll type it in chat. The prompt is very simple. Write a story from your voice, or using your voice, I should say. Using a voice that sounds just like you would in real life, as if you were speaking. Okay, so I don't want you to try anything fancy, but just write from the first person and try to capture what your voice would sound like if you were narrating a story in person, if that makes any sense. All right, so does that sound doable?
Yes.
Okay, I'll give you about 10 minutes and then I'll stop you and then we'll hear a little bit of what you came up with at about 6:46. Okay, Jordan and ER. Hopefully you wrote something really great or something at least interesting. Of course, the point of these kinds of exercises is not to have like a finished product or anything, but just to practice what we have been talking about. I was thinking maybe you would like to post a few sentences, maybe on chat, copy and paste it, or just read something out loud if you like.
Okay. I went down the stairs of the Black Tower, wondering what could it be. The only thing I found was a rusted old key and a wooden box. I took the key and opened the door left of me, but the door disappeared into nothing. Well, that's all I had.
Okay. Good job, Jordan. Very nice. Is there a way for you to copy and paste that into the chat?
Let me see.
Okay. Well, while you're figuring that out, and don't worry if you can't, let's take a look at a little bit of what ER wrote. ER, wow, you really wrote a lot. Let's just take a look at a few sentences from the beginning. Would you like to read it, or would you like me to read it? Okay, I'll just go ahead. So ER wrote, it took only 10 minutes for my life to change from all right crummy to hopelessly worse. My father passed away with each blink of the dot on that cardio reader we were all gathered by, and it was like counting each heartbeat to his last. I wept for 10 days following that night alone, it seemed, with my family. My heart shriveled in some time after the final blip, and I was lost in a world as black as black on night. Sorry, as black on night. Many times I had wondered what would happen when Barrios went to his final sleep. It did not seem possible for me to understand that night would be it. Okay, I'll stop there. Wow, really good. I really like some of the imagery here and the intensity of the situation. What draws my attention initially is this little phrase. Oops. This little phrase that reads, it took that reads, all right crummy to hopelessly worse. Just that language is very personal, or very it's very tangible. And also the description of the cardio reader we were gathered by. There's also a lot of metaphors in this particular work. We haven't talked about that, but that's another way to kind of establish your voice and to develop your voice, is work on using metaphors or not using metaphors, and kind of having a very sort of simplistic language. But this is very colorful and very it's a very rich passage. It's almost like a sense of like a memoir. And if Jordan, you were not able to figure out how to copy yours, I couldn't hear every sentence. That's why I was hoping I could see it. But if not, that's okay. Okay, so let's try our second exercise, and this one will be just a very short one. All right, just to kind of make a point of contrast. So I will only give you 5 minutes for this one. And here's the prompt. Okay, I'll type it into chat. All right, so now let's just put it like this. Now, write for 5 minutes. Okay, so here the prompt is a point of comparison. So now I don't want you to write in your voice. I want you to write in someone else's voice. You're going to step outside of you, kind of like the way that you sound. And I want you to use the voice of one of your relatives, maybe your mother or your father or grandparents or an aunt or an uncle, someone who has a certain sound to their voice that you can imagine. All right. And the purpose of this is to draw the contrast between your voice and someone else who's not you. All right. So 5 minutes, the subject can be about completely anything you like, but try to work on just telling a story in about a paragraph, no more than that. Okay. So I'll stop you at 6:57, let's call it. Hello. Did you guys come up with something? Something good, mimicking the voice of one of your relatives? You guys still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So, Jordan, would you care to read a little bit, or?
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. His voice was calm as summer, but over years of war, it developed into a growl of no better than 20 wheels, 20 gears. Yet some of his old voice is still there, waiting to come out of his voice.
Very good. So, are you describing the voice of a relative there?
Kinda.
Okay, good. And how about you, ER? It looks like you just. Is it the passage beginning with Cassie did not like to write back to me? Looks like that's what it is. Okay, so Cassie, I'll just read a little bit. Cassie did not like to write back to me. She hated writing back to me, her aunt. What does a 15-year-old do besides write all the time? And she does not take a second out of those days at school to write to me. I send her money. I send her cards and photos. She never writes back. Send me a damn Christmas card, Cassie. I talk to her mother on the phone all the time. Oh, she's too busy with essays for school, and I think she does calculus, etc. Okay, very good. That's an excellent point of view shift there, ER. And it sounds like you're mimicking, you're copying the voice of maybe an aunt or a relative. And that's exactly right. I mean, so we can tell this is very different than the voice that you had in your previous example. If I just scroll up and I look to the first part, where the language is much more sort of casual to some extent. And here, the language has a sort of a different level to it. And also a sense of aggravation or annoyance at this character. So that's very good. This is excellent. Okay, do you guys have any questions for me before we wrap up?
Well, I do have one.
Yeah, sure.
Story like world building.
World building.
How, yeah, how much should you go? Like not as that, but how deep you should go in there?
Okay, so you're asking about the concept of world building, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay, so world building, that refers to the idea of developing the setting and the atmosphere and all the characters in usually a longer piece of fiction like a novel,
yes.
um, or maybe a very extensive, detailed short story. Um, so world building, actually, I'm going to touch on this in a program that I'm doing in February. I think it's February 1st, where we talk about setting. So actually, we will detail world building then. Okay, if you'd like to mark that on your calendar, Jordan. Um,
Okay.
World building is a really important concept because what it is, it has to do with all the details, all the descriptive details that's important to writing. Voice, to some extent, actually might be a little bit connected to, if you think about it, because when you're trying to develop
Describe.
your personality, you're also developing your world, right?
Yes, like when you're describing like how the mountain ranges are or the valley.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't hear everything you just said exactly,
Oh,
but
oh,
so anyway, yeah, the concept of world building is really important to writing for sure. ER, did you have any questions? I have read some. The question is, have I ever read Dan Simmons or Isaac Asimov? I have read some Isaac Asimov. He's a classic science fiction writer. I've heard of Dan Simmons, but have not read so much of him. But Isaac Asimov is a great science fiction writer. Wrote a ton of different books. Definitely worth reading. Who are some of your favorite authors, ER? Okay. Tolkien, Simmons, Knight, Cornwell. Okay, excellent. All right. Well, listen, this has been a great program, and I hope to see you guys in January and February. I'll be doing additional programs, um, and you can follow the calendar. And Aaron, how would they find out about the additional programs coming up?
So all of our programs are listed on our online calendar. If you go to library.loudoun.gov, just go to the event calendar. You can search for writing. You can also just look up all the team programs. It'll have all the ones coming up. We're going to be having one, let's see, January 13th and then February 1st. I think you'll be back for both of those.
Yep.
We're also doing a few in-person ones as well. So check the calendar for those coming up soon. Uh,
Oh.
yeah. And then actually, ER and Jordan, are you two entering the It's All Right contest? Fair enough. We have an adult one too. It's later in the year, but keep an eye out. How about you, Jordan? Are you going to enter?
maybe. Like,
Maybe?
I didn't think about it.
Okay. Okay. Well, we start accepting admissions on January 2nd. So it'll be on the website. Just make sure you check.
I will.
Okay. All right.
All right. Well, I really enjoyed teaching you guys a little bit. I hope you learned something and enjoyed the program. And Aaron, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to coming back in January.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a nice night.
Thank
Thank you.